Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Each week we cover topics related to the pre-med journey to medical school and beyond, from the MCAT to completing your application and from starting medical school to choosing a specialty. Our podcast will provide essential information for anyone contemplating a career in medicine.
Hey guys, it's Dr. Mehta here from Med School Coach and Prospective Doctor. Now, you may have heard USMLE Step 1 just changed from a 3-digit score to a pass-fail, and this is huge news. Now, it's not going to change until January 2022, but it's just such big news that we had to do a podcast on it. And in fact, we have this awesome 2-part podcast. The first part is myself and Dr. David Flick, who is a Army physician as well as Med School Coach's Director of Residency Advising. He's going to talk with me about how this affects U.S.-based med students. And then in the second part, I have Elias Sparra, who is a fourth-year St. George medical student who is currently in the match process, also one of Med School Coach's master tutors, and we're going to talk about how this affects the international student. So this is going to be a great 2-part podcast. Be sure to subscribe. I know you guys are going to love this. If you're international, skip to part 2. If you're a U.S. student, listen to part 1. Thanks, guys. Okay, everybody. We're so excited to have you today. Today's a big episode. I'm Dr. Mehta, and I'm here today with Dr. Flick, who's our Residency Advising Director, as well as the Associate Director of Medical School Advising here at Med School Coach. And we're here today to talk about the ginormous change that just got introduced by the NBME and the USMLE about the USMLE Step 1 changing from a 3-digit score to pass-fail. So, David, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Sahil, for having me. This is a really big deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, first things first, like, were you shocked? Because I was.
Yeah, I wasn't. I've been following this kind of online. There's been several threads going around, whether you're looking at stuff like Student Doctor or Reddit or even on like formal USMLE, panels. They've been talking about it for a year, and it kind of took me by surprise when I saw it yesterday.
Yeah, I heard about it too. I mean, I've heard about it in the past, and I brushed it off, and I thought, no way. They're not going to change that to pass-fail. It's too big a test. It was just too important in the residency process. And then I get this text message yesterday that says, check out this link. And I started reading it. And I was like, wow, they really did change it. I mean, I was shocked.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And I was reading even on threads, there was comments below about kind of like, older physicians talking about how they were surprised that USMLE had even become a big deal. And then the younger students talking about how it dominates their whole life. So yeah, there was a pretty robust conversation going on. And then, they had like this whole invitational conference on USMLE scoring to do studies and look at data. So yeah, it's big.
So for those of you listeners who sort of don't have a background on this, let me just go through very quickly what changed here. So basically the NBME and the USMLE introduced 3 new rules for test takers. The first was that you can only take a test 4 times. Before, you could actually take it 6 times, so you could take any of the steps up to 6 times. So if you failed, you could take it again and again and again and again. Now you can only take it 4 times. And the reality is that doesn't really affect U.S. med students. 95% of U.S. med students pass on the first try. So USMLE Step 1 has really always been not necessarily about pass-fail, or at least in the last 20 plus years has not been about pass-fail, and has really been about the score. The second change was that USMLE Step 2 CS, which is that clinical skills component, can only be taken after you pass USMLE Step 1. And again, from a U.S. med student perspective, that wasn't a big deal. But then the third thing, that was a big deal, right? So it went from this 3-digit score to a pass-fail. And I mean, David, when you were going through school and for the, students that you advise, I mean, how big a deal was Step 1?
Yeah, Step 1 is everything. And I remember I was kind of behind the curve. I didn't really find out about Step 1 till, it was pressing to study for it in my second year. But I had plenty, if not most of my peers in medical school were studying for step one since like they started medical school. That's all they talked about. That's all they studied.
Yeah, and it really was that way. I mean, I remember when I studied for step one, I like hold myself in a little hole for like 8 weeks. And that was honestly, I wasn't a huge studier in undergrad and even in med school until step one. Like that was the test that I knew was going to make or break everything, right? It was going to give me the opportunity to do the specialty as I wanted to do or go to the programs that I wanted to go to. And as you said, it really dominated life. I mean, that was what people talked about. That's what everybody went towards. I mean, all these resources we hear about, first aid, Golion, Pathoma, Picmonic, like everything that we hear about is all based upon doing well on that USMLE Step 1 and maximizing your score.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to just, every medical student knows the importance of Step 1, and even pre-meds know, the MCAT is what determines what you get into medical school. And I often use that same analogy when talking about advising medical students getting into residency. Hey, USMLE Step 1 is like that MCAT. That score kind of predetermines what you're going to be able to do. And everybody knows that. And I think that kind of speaks to this kind of parallel curriculum that, the USMLE people talk about, and kind of why this decision came down is that, yeah, everybody's going to medical school and going to classes. And then in the back of their mind, if not completely separate, is they're just chronically studying for step one because they know the importance.
So if USMLE Step 1 goes to pass-fail, which obviously all indications are now that it's going to, and they say that the earliest that would happen would be January 2022. What implications do you think that has on med students who are applying to the match?
Yeah, so right now, nothing changes. And up until, through 2021, it's still going to be the same kind of focus on USMLE Step 1. But then those applicants that are going to be looking at, taking their test in whatever spring, summer of 2022, it's pass-fail. On the one hand, what it means is, one, I don't think right away you're going to see people just let go of studying all out for it, though that may change over time. I think people are still going to put a lot of pressure on the test. But then naturally, I think that just the emphasis just switches naturally over to Step 2, which has its pros and cons, right? So Step 2 then becomes Step 2 CK becomes the new Step 1. Now it's the only graded step before getting into residency. So there's just going to be a greater emphasis on Step 2. And I know that also implies, or the intent here is supposed to be that they're trying to tell residency program directors, hey, can we stop putting so much focus on USMLE Step 1? Can you look at, for lack of a better term, it's kind of overplayed, look at applications holistically, volunteer work, whatever, leadership activities, stuff like this. So I think for those people that are going to take it in 2022 and then, match into residency after that, you're going to have to put more of a focus on the rest of your medical school education, including your all the other competencies in clinical skills and extracurricular activities.
And I wonder if schools, which have traditionally actually been moving towards a pass-fail model for their first 2 years of curriculum or their first year and a half of basically basic science curriculum, I wonder if they're going to be pressured actually to move away from that and towards a more grading system, because at the end of the day, the holistic application is great, but the reality is that, program directors need some sort of standardization. And the only thing that they're going to have now is USMLE Step 2 CK, which makes the emphasis and the pressure of that test probably even greater than before on Step 1, because this is your only chance. And I just wonder if schools are actually going to need to grade their students or be a little bit more cognizant about how they rank their students. Most med schools don't necessarily rank their students 1 to 150, but they rank them in quartiles in more or less right now, or a lot of schools, or most schools at least do that. And I just wonder if there's going to actually be more emphasis on that and it's actually going to create a more cutthroat environment rather than a less cutthroat environment.
Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing too, is that if you have to distinguish applicants, those pass-fail schools, I mean, how else are you going to start to try to separate students? And students feel that pressure too, right? They want to have some way to set themselves apart. So it's not just schools, but students may be putting pressure on the schools too to say, hey, maybe this pass-fail model isn't going to work in this new age. But yeah, it basically just distributes the pressure elsewhere. So you may see changes there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for a student who's coming into med school today, or let's say a student who's coming into med school in 2022, how do you think that they go about distinguishing themselves for residency? Because at the end of the day, I mean, they still need to do that somehow. Like, what do you think is going to be the steps that they have to take in order to do so?
Well, I think the other things that are on so ARIS is the application system that gets used for applying to residency, the electronic residency application service. And the other parts of ARIS besides just your scores are basically your clinical experience and your non-clinical experience, including research. So, and I know that even the USMLE folks who kind of put this out too, is that they kind of hoped that taking the pressure off step one would allow more time, more energy to be expended on other things like research. That's going to be one element that's going to have increasing importance for residency applicants. They're going to have to build some leadership roles during medical school, some volunteer activities, and then also probably the importance of research might increase just because there's going to be more time and more available energy for that stuff. But yeah, I think the only way you're going to separate yourself is with step two. But one of the big problems there is that when I advise residency applicants right now, sometimes people come to me with a low step one score. And at least you can say, hey, that's okay. You can make up for it with step two, right? But now if step two is the only one that's graded, you're kind of tied to that score. If you don't do well on step two, there's no way to kind of make up for it with another standardized test.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I just don't know if this is really going to have the intended consequence that it should. There's a lot of clamor out there that now the name of medical school will become even a bigger deal. I used to tell all my applicants that no matter where you go to medical school in the United States, you're going to be able to do whatever you want. You just have to go there and you have to get a great step one score, and you can go do dermatology or plastic surgery or literally whatever you want from whatever med school there is. And, we'll see how it plays out, but that may not end up being the case anymore. And so it may actually require some students to rethink that paradigm of getting into any med school is good enough in the States. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't anymore. We'll see how it plays out, but I'm a little bit worried that that's going to almost translate down to even more fervor amongst pre-med students that they have to get into a top-name medical school.
Yeah, that is unfortunate, that distribution of the pressure. I didn't think about that, but yeah, if people are focusing more on name recognition, because really part of the process of USMLE scoring is the reliability of it, is that program directors know I can count on this score to give me an indicator of performance. They're going to start looking at other reliability factors like name recognition, and that's going to spill over to pre-meds. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost too bad, which is funny to say, because the reality is that step one probably is not actually a good indicator of if you're going to be a good doctor or not. In fact, it really isn't a good indicator, right? I mean, there's so many other things that go into being a good physician. Like, I mean, it's just endless. And knowing the Krebs cycle is probably not in reality anywhere near the top 100 of the things that make you a good doctor at the end of the day. So in some ways you can see, okay, yeah, it makes sense. Let's not focus on the grade that you get here. Let's just make sure you have the basic knowledge to move forward. But in other ways, it just is going to, I think the pressure is always still going to be there for programs to select the best candidates. And now that just shifts to step two. I don't know. I'm not even sure what to make of it.
Yeah, and it is worth noting, it is a good point, is that, it's stressful to talk about, step one disappearing as this indicator. And yet the positive side here is that you're absolutely right, is, whether you can identify the ribosome that's involved in, the antibiotic that you're using, or, the Krebs cycle, or, all these kind of somewhat arbitrary facts on USMLE step one, there is good evidence. There's actually data to say that step 2 CK is a better indicator of good clinical performance. So, I kind of applaud the USMLE for looking at that and saying, hey, step 2 is actually a better indicator. So, shifting the pressure to that maybe is beneficial if our goal is to create good clinicians, people that can treat patients very well. Maybe that's part of the family medicine doctor side of me too, saying, hey, it's not all about numbers. It's about how you are at the bedside and how you can interact with patients. And you'll come up with a good detailed treatment plan. So there is a good benefit there, yeah.
For sure. So, I guess any final words of advice for those students who are out there and either nervous about this change or wondering what it's going to mean for them? I have a lot of questions that I've gotten revolve around, hey, if I take the USMLE in 2020 or 2021, does that mean it'll be reported as pass-fail? And we're getting questions like that all the time from students. Like any parting advice for some of these students who are worried?
Yeah, I'd say there's still, USMLE is going to put more information. I think they set that hard date from, January 2021, and everything's going to be the same up until that point. They did say that they'll kind of post more information as the change gets closer. But I think, the bottom line to medical students, and this is probably sound advice whether or not this change actually occurred, is maybe it's a good reminder for medical students to kind of back up and take some perspective of their medical education, is that medical school isn't, studying for step 1, nor is it studying for step 2. And I think the goal is to remember that your medical education, remember, I tell people all the time, make sure you read your personal statement that you went to medical school for. Try to read it once a year to remind yourself about why you're getting into this profession in the first place. Is remember, our goal is to treat patients well, so embrace that whole medical school curriculum, whether it's, a boring pharmacology class or a first year biochemistry class. Embrace it all in the sense that you're trying to learn to take care of patients. Really pay attention to the curriculum in every regard. You're still going to have to perform well on these step exams, whether it's step 1 or step 2. But maybe it's good advice to just take a step back, take some perspective, and really focus on learning the material well, keeping the heart of your goal is learning to take care of people.
Yeah, I can't agree more on that. I think that there's something to be said about the fact that we've moved medical education towards this testing approach. But the reality is that medical education shouldn't be that, right? If you get a broad undergraduate medical education, you're going to be a good doctor, whether you end up as a family med doctor or, an interventionalist or anything else in between. Medical school gives you the opportunity to just learn about the fundamentals, learn how to interact with patients, learn how to be good at the bedside. Those are the things that are going to carry you, right? The reality is, as you can tell me as a practicing family med doc, I can tell you as a practicing interventionalist that there is pretty much very little that I learned on USMLE Step 2, and absolutely probably nothing that I learned on USMLE Step 1 that I use on an everyday basis when I actually treat patients, right? Yeah, the foundations of clinical knowledge, of course, but it's not that it's because I studied for that test that I could be a good doctor today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the stuff that you take home. The stuff that you're actually doing in practice has really no correlation with any of those things. It's really everything you learned in your clinical education. And yeah, you're right. That background is set, that foundation is set through the studying, but yeah, not so much the testing, but the curriculum itself. It's a good point.
Awesome. Well, listen, it was great talking to you about this. I think that nobody has a better knowledge of how residencies are going to look at their new students or their new applicants post 2022 than you do as our residency program director. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully students out there reaping the benefits of it and not necessarily all the potential added stress. We'll have to just see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's going to be a kind of a struggle to navigate through it, but that's kind of what we're there for. And everybody's going to be all right in the long run. I think it's just going to take some adjusting.
I agree. Well, Dr. Flick, awesome talking to you. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com and medschoolcoach.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey and beyond.